Washington Journal continues.
Well, we are pleased to have with us the Dean of the House of Representatives and the Chairman Emeritus of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Representative John Dingell, Democrat of Michigan. Mr. Dingell, some news reports this morning said that the House of Representatives wants to have health care done by March 18th when the President leaves the country. Is that going to happen?
I can't tell you that. We've run into nothing but trouble as we've progressed on this matter. If you will recall, I've been trying to get it enacted for 54 years. I'm hopeful we're going to be able to do it, and I believe we will. But there is almost total partisan opposition from my Republican colleagues on this legislation, including tremendous amounts of effort to, quite frankly, stall almost everything in the Senate.
You wrote an op-ed recently for the Detroit Free Press, I believe it was, where you said that the bill is bipartisan, but the vote will not be bipartisan.
I think that's a fair statement. There are a lot of things in that bill which were ideas which the Republicans had. It's far different than the bill which I would have had. I'd go for single payer. But,
and that's what H.R. 1 is every year when you introduce it?
It's actually H.R. 15, which has a member of the district. But I'm a little bit like former Prime Minister Deng of China, who said he didn't care whether the cat was black or white, he wanted to catch mice. I want us to get a bill that's going to work.
What do you like about what you think is going to be the reconciliation bill? And do we know what it's going to be yet?
We've got a pretty good idea.
Okay.
It will be somewhere between the House and the Senate bill and the President's first and more recent suggestions to the Congress. Frankly, I care less about the precise language of the bill than we do something. We have a calamity coming at us in 2020. About $1 in every 5 in this country is going to go to that purpose of health care. And by the year 2080, every nickel that is spent and earned in this country, the whole gross domestic product, is going to be going for health care. And in 2020, you're going to find that health care is going to cost, it's doubled in the last 10 years, it's going to double in the next 10 years. It's $12,000 a year now for a family. In 2020, it's going to be, guess, $25,000. Families are not going to be able to afford it. And businesses are not going to be able to afford it, especially small businesses. And we can't afford what we're doing now, because if you look at one of those nice American cars you can see running by, they've got $1,600 worth of health care in them, only $750 worth of steel. Foreigners don't have to put any of that in. Result, the United States has become uncompetitive. And health care cost was one of the main reasons for both the autos and for the steel companies going into bankruptcy.
John Dingell is our guest. The numbers are on the screen. Reminder, first-time callers only this morning. We're talking about health care and the health care debate that's currently going on. And obviously, Representative Dingell can talk about just about anything legislatively in case your interests go elsewhere. So if it's going to go from $12,000 per family to $25,000 per family, how do we bridge that gap without, is it deficit spending, is it tax increases, is it cost controls, is it all of the above, but what's your preference?
Well, first of all, we can't undergo that without hideous consequences. But understand, if we pass the legislation, we'll be able to get that cost curve bent down. If we had taken what Richard Nixon wanted us to do during his career, the total percentage of health care in the gross domestic product would be about 10%. If we'd taken what Clinton wanted, it would be about 14%. It's gone to 18%. And as you notice, it's going to go to 20% very shortly. So if we get something done to control this cost expansion, which the bill does, we can head that off.
Why, prior to you, why have you always introduced health care, and why did your father always introduce national health care?
Well, that's an interesting story. Dad was a poor Polish boy, age 20, from the west side of Detroit. He got tuberculosis, and he was sent west to die. of tuberculosis at Union Printers Home. He survived because he got the health care that that particular union got. Doctor gave him 6 months to live when he got his first examination. And he always had a tremendous interest in this. That was very, very important. That formed his thinking. And it formed the thinking of a lot of people. Remember, Otto von Bismarck did this in Germany in the 1880s. Edward VII tried to do it did it in Britain in 1907. Teddy Roosevelt started out. Franklin Delano Roosevelt took it up in 1935. And Harry Truman tried it in 43, which is when Dad introduced his first legislation.
John Dingell is our guest. Tom from Levittown, PA, Democrat. You are first up with Congressman Dingell.
Hi, Congressman. I'd like to ask you a question about, I saw the guest that was on before, and he said that it showed the money that was being spent overseas. How can you justify spending that money overseas when we have thousands of people dying here without health care insurance? I don't quite understand that.
We were talking with the director of USAID.
I saw the article, or rather I saw the program. Your question's a good one, and it's hard to defend our people. But remember, the United States has many concerns in this world, not the least of which is, quite frankly, very, very important questions involving foreign policy. And our foreign policy is supported largely by expenditures, but those expenditures are necessary, quite frankly, to maintain a position of leadership in the world. And when we help people, or when we get people with the means to work with us on matters of importance in our policy, it helps us. And we have, as you have noted, my friend Tom, a tremendous demand for money, far in excess of what it is this country can produce to carry out all of its different policies and all of its different concerns. But foreign policy is extremely important because with wise foreign policy, we avoid wars, we help friends, we see to it that our position of leadership in the world and our security and world peace are protected.
Congressman Dingell, you've been in Congress since about 1955.
55.
Who's been your best friend over the 54 years?
Well, the closest friend I ever had in the Congress was a little guy by the name of John Moss from California. But I've had many wonderful friends. Dale Kildee is a friend of mine. Rayburn was one of my mentors and teachers. John McCormick, may God bless him, was good. Tip O'Neill. Jim Wright. A great chairman I served with was a fellow by the name of Warren Harris from Arkansas. I've had great friends in the Senate. Hubert Humphrey was a particular friend of mine, as was Senator Douglas.
After 54 years, maybe you've got a little perspective on Congress. What would you recommend to somebody who wants to run?
I'd say work like the very devil to get yourself educated and ready. Learn the issues and learn a couple of things. First of all, my dad taught me that you got to tell the truth because you can't remember the lie you told yesterday. And second of all, be very, very careful to do what's right because there's huge danger out there for those who don't.
We have a tweet here from Twitter.com. I wonder if people understand they will get a fine for not having health care if this passes. Pure socialism.
Well, here's the problem. We have a huge number of difficulties. You have pre-existing conditions. They're going to bar you if you don't do that. They now can cancel your policy while you're being rolled into the operating room on a gurney. And there are lots of reforms. But if we're going to carry out these reforms, we have to cover everybody. The fine is very, very modest. Now, I'm willing to take another course. We have to get everybody covered so that we can control these costs, which are going to destitute the country, bankrupt families, destroy business and opportunity, and have a crushing effect upon our economy and upon our people. And so the mechanism chosen in the handling of this bill is to say somebody who doesn't get himself a policy has to pay a part of that cost. That's to encourage people to have a policy. It's in their interest. Now, there's a lot of young people who don't want to have policies, but we find that most of them want to have policies, but we find that most of them don't want to have policies because of cost of current policies. This legislation is going to bring the cost down very, very startlingly, and it's going to eliminate all of the abuses. But in order to do those things, we have to see that we cover everybody, and that's one of the mechanisms for doing it.
Dothan, Alabama. Nancy, on our Republican line, you're on with Congressman John Dingell.
Mr. Dingell, why don't you and Nancy Pelosi be the first two to sign up for this health care bill if it's so great? Thank you.
Thank you. Could you repeat the question?
She wanted to know, yes, and we'll get that. It's not quite, I could barely hear that too. She wanted to know if you'd be the first to sign up for this health care bill if it passes, if it's so great.
Oh, absolutely. If you look at the bill, it gives everybody exactly the same health care opportunities that members of Congress and employees have, because members of Congress are treated as federal employees. So, emphatically so, this is not to give somebody less than I have, but it's to give everybody the same thing I have, the same opportunities, the same securities, and the same protections, and the same opportunities for coverage.
You have always called for a single-payer plan.
Yes.
The U.S. is rather unique in its employer-based health care system, correct?
Well, yes.
Pretty much so. But chances are we're not going to move away from that?
Well, this is an evolutionary thing. Our system of government and our people and the way things are going in this country has made us always be evolutionary in our approach to government as opposed to revolutionary, and we say thank God for that. But having said this, I'd much rather see a single-payer plan. But I don't believe that's to happen at this time. And while I would very much like to see that, the hard fact of the matter is it is not possible. So politics being the art of the possible and having to do what is best for the country at the time, we're going to have to go for something different, less than I would have chosen to have.
Just to change the subject just a little, your colleague from Michigan, Sander Levin, is taking over the Ways and Means Committee.
And he's going to do a fine job. Sandy is a very thoughtful, hardworking, smart member. He's a very decent, balanced guy, and he has the kind of temperament that's going to be necessary and needed to run the Committee on Ways and Means, which is an enormously complex and difficult operation.
Is Charlie Rangel a friend of yours also?
Oh, Charlie's a good friend. I have very few enemies in the Congress. I have an awful lot of friends. Charlie's a very good friend, and I'm very sad about his problems.
Have the Democrats, in your view, made mistakes in the way health care has been crafted over the last year and a half?
Not really. There are things they've done in this legislation that substantively I don't agree with. But I have to tell you that I think given the problems we've had, they've done an extraordinary job. The big problem that we confront on these matters is that it is enormously complex. You're talking about a piece of legislation for 300 million people. You're talking about a program that's going to cost enormous sums of money. And you're going to talk about a free society of people who all have their own ideas and thoughts. And that's reflected both in the House and in the Senate over there. And it's the making of legislation is a very complex business. And as you'll remember, Bismarck said, if you like sausage and you like legislation, don't watch either one of them made.
Waldorf, Maryland. Robert, Independent Line. You're on with Congressman Dingell.
Hey, how you doing today, Congressman?
Fine, and I hope you are.
I'm doing good. Just a couple of questions, two to be exact. With all of the media hype saying that this process was so bad, isn't this the closest we've come to changing the healthcare system? And why is that? And also, isn't there a provision in the bill that says the insurance companies will have to invest 90% of their earnings back into the system?
there is a provision which requires that the insurance company pay a certain amount out in its to its clients of the earnings and the revenues that it gets. That's to stop some of the abuses that we have seen in the insurance industry by paying too much in, frankly, benefits to their officers and shareholders, and too little to their policyholders. It's one of the many reforms which we're trying to get into the insurance industry for the protection of the ratepayers. Now, having said this, you're right. This is about as close as we've ever been, and I'm hopeful that we can finish the issue because of the urgent need of addressing the problem before it bankrupts the country.
Houston, Pennsylvania, Eleanor, Democrat.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to talk to you both. I felt like your last question was right on for the fellow that's running the show. I feel that one of the things that happened in healthcare was in the 50s, my brother had to go to school in Italy to become a doctor. And I never could understand that the American Medical Association did that to our people in America, that they couldn't be a doctor if they wanted to be, because it's such a hard profession. And I think that the majority of them have done a wonderful job, but I feel that they have helped create part of this mess by limiting the amount of men that we have that could be doctors.
Well, there is much in what you say, and thank you. There is now, and will shortly be, an increasing shortage of doctors. That's coming about in good part because of the costs, because of the fact that in many instances the payments to the doctors are not adequate. And one of the things in this legislation and in other legislation that I'm addressing is to try and see to it we get those payments up. One of the other problems we have with regard to doctors, which is a very severe one, is if you look, you'll find that foreign countries pay their doctors cost of education. We do not. Our young people, when they come out of school, will have a debt of $200,000, $400,000, a huge debt that they're carrying to get through medical school. Other countries don't do that. So as a result, a lot of foreign doctors come over here, and they can outcompete our people in this matter. Now, we do have some very difficult problems. Family physicians, general practice physicians are all in short supply. And they are in good part because they can't make as much money in that area as they could in others. Now, most doctors don't go in to make money. They go in because they believe in public service. But a fellow has to look at what he's going to be able to earn and whether he's going to be able to pay off his debts from education and whether he can provide a decent life for his family.
Lieutenant Dingell joined the Army at age 18. He was due to take part in the first invasion of Japan in November 1945. Well, where were you in August 1945 when the bombs were dropped?
I was just graduating from infantry OCS at Fort Benning, Georgia, in OC Class 517. And we got news that Harry Truman had dropped that bomb. And a few days later came the story that the war was over. I had my orders to report to the port of embarkation, where I was going to be a small unit leader in the invasion of Japan. I called the Army later, and I said, now, what were you going to do with me? And they said, well, Dingell, you were going to be in the first wave. And I said, well, what was my life expectancy? And they said, well, Dingell, we're glad you asked that because it was 10 seconds. And that told me, said, Dingell, you did the right thing. And Harry Truman did the right thing, and 500,000 Americans and I agree on that point.
Who's your favorite president of all time?
Oh, I have, can I say two?
Sure.
Roosevelt, who was a hero.
FDR.
FDR. The other Roosevelt was great too, but FDR, he was very special. And then Harry Truman. I remember we were talking about my time in the Army when I was the guys in my platoon came over to me one time, and after Roosevelt died, they said, "Dingell, your dad's in Congress." I said, "Yeah." They said, "What does he say about this guy Truman?" They didn't know what kind of president he was going to be. And they said, "Will you write your dad and ask him what he has to say?" So I wrote Dad. And the next mail call, they called my name and they pitched me my letter from Dad. I wouldn't let him write on his congressional stationer. I told him he could write on like anybody else because I wanted to make my way on my own. And when I was sitting there on my bunk reading the letter, all of a sudden the whole company is at the foot. And they said, "Dingell, what kind of guy is this Truman going to be? You told us you were going to write your dad." And I said, so I said, "Well, I'll read the letter." I wish I had it. But Dad said, "Son, he's going to be a great president." And he was right.
Battle Creek, Michigan, Reginald, Republican.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I want to know how you can justify voting for a bill that the majority of the American public is not for.
Well, let's address that. I've looked at polls. It says 76% of the Americans are in favor of this. And I would point out to you that if you look at the essential parts of the legislation, you'll find almost all the Americans are in favor of it. You'll find also that there are a tremendous number of falsehoods told about what's in the bill, either by reason of deliberate intent to deceive or because people don't understand. One of the problems we've had has been that we have been writing this bill in public instead of having the bill presented, which could then be discussed and dissected in the orderly congressional process. And that's led to a huge number of misunderstandings. You'll recall we had last year, when we were traveling around, people were saying, "Well, there's death panels here. They're going to kill people." That's hooey. It's not in the bill. And then they were saying, "Oh, they're going to pull the plug on Grandma." Well, they're not going to pull the plug on Grandma. Interestingly enough, both of those proposals existed in other Republican-sponsored legislation. And the same folks that sponsored those proposals as Republican bills are now denouncing them under the Democratic package.
How's Nancy Pelosi doing?
Nancy and I have a somewhat rocky relationship at times, but I think on this matter she's done a superb job. And it's been one of the most difficult pieces of legislation I've ever seen. I've handled legislation that took me 18 months to get through. And I'm hopeful that we can better that, but I'm not able to tell you so. And you know, one thing is, we passed a bill in the House by a good, decent majority, and then we passed a bill in the Senate with 60% of the senators voting for it. And everybody's saying we're ramming this bill through. That's hooey.
Columbia City, Indiana. Jerry, you're on with Congressman John Dingell.
Hi, how you doing today?
Fine, and I hope you are.
Yeah, I'm fine. But my question is, why are we the only nation that allows for-profit insurance companies? Every other country or industrialized country has outlawed it.
Well, they haven't really outlawed it. But every other major industrial country in the world, all of our competitors, has this done through government-sponsored and government programs. And the end result is they're able to outcompete us in the most unbelievable fashion. And it's one of the things that drives our people under. When in business, it all caused, quite frankly, it was a major cause of the bankruptcy of the steel industry. It was a major cause of bankruptcy in the automobile industry. And one of the curses of this is that our people are having the devil's own time competing. Now, having said that, it's just the way it evolved. If you will observe, our government tends to be a rather slow-moving enterprise, and other countries with the parliamentary system were able to move much faster on these kinds of things. and have a rather different system of government. They tend to be more social democracies, where we intend to concentrate on the rights and the privileges and responsibilities of the ordinary citizen.
Quite heated Toyota hearings last week. You were quite active in those hearings. What's the status of Toyota and the U.S. Congress?
Well, Toyota is a business that manufactures automobiles. And they, like every other business that we have in this country, is entitled to be fairly treated. But they're also entitled to be regulated in the public interest the way all of their competitors are. And very frankly, there are now substantial questions about the safety of their automobiles, about their cooperation with the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, and there are questions of whether or not they know what was the cause of the brake problems and the sudden acceleration problems. And all I want to do is to see that Toyota does what they need to do to comply with laws, keep American citizens safe as they drive down the road. Now, having said that, one of the problems we had, frankly, before our committee was, you will remember that I asked a lot of questions of the CEO of Toyota. And one of the distressing things was he couldn't answer the questions, and he pointed out that the answers to the questions were known in Tokyo. And also he pointed out that he could not answer them for that reason, and that the responsibility for those questions was not his. Now, this is the CEO of the company. And I think one of the things we're going to have to do is to assure not only that Toyota cars are safe, they're treated fairly, they comply with our laws, they don't use the fact that they're foreign ownership to get better treatment and to escape federal regulation for the safety of people. And I think that those questions, plus the safety questions, still have much to be answered.
Boston, Carol Pratt, please go ahead.
Yes, hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. I just want to make a comment. I live in Massachusetts, so of course you all know that we are mandated to have health insurance. And I don't have a problem with that, but I just want to say that a lot of people, I believe, that's opposing this bill just really don't understand. And I do know that the cost, if more people are if everybody has to have insurance, that the cost will go down as a whole. Because right now, I'm paying almost half of my paycheck in health insurance, and I would love to see this bill go past so that we can all share the cost and the cost can go down. Thank you.
Well, that's a very wise observation, and I thank you. First of all, unless we cover everybody, we cannot control the costs, and we cannot prevent the calamity that I see coming, where $1 in 5 of everybody is going to be spent by the federal is going to be spent on health care. And I would point out something interesting too. The United States is now approaching the point where 50% or more of the costs of health care is paid for by the federal government under various federal programs. I think that's unacceptable. And so to get control of the costs, and so that when you go to bed at night, you're going to have to worry, is my employer going to be covering me when I get up? Or when you retire, you're going to have to say, you know, by golly, is my employer going to continue taking care of my health care now that I'm retired? Because you're finding retirees all over this country are losing health care, and employees are going to bed with health care and waking up the next morning and finding they don't have it.
The employment statistics just came out about 20 minutes ago, 9.7% unemployment rate, about the 15th Congressional District.
15th Congressional District, we know the meaning of economic downturn. When the nation gets a cold, it's the 15th District that sneezes. Michigan's a manufacturing economy, and we're dependent on manufacturing. And when the auto industry and manufacturing hurts in this country as it's doing now, we really do hurt. Our unemployment levels are above national because of the terrible things that have been happening to manufacturing in this country. That's true not only for Michigan, but it's true all across the Midwest, because all of those economies of states like Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, they're dependent on manufacturing.
What scares you the most looking ahead? Healthcare, manufacturing, what scares you the most? What worries you the most?
Well, I'm not scared. I worry. I'm worried about, frankly, world peace, terrorism. I'm worried terribly about the economy and getting it going. And by the way, on the economy, it was interesting. George W. Bush got taken to the woodshed by Mr. Bernanke, the head of the Fed, and by his Secretary of the Treasury. And they both told him that if he didn't do something very drastic, like passing TARP, that we were going to see an economic collapse because the banks were going to all die. And so we had to go in and do that. But George W. Bush, a very conservative guy, recognized that he couldn't make Hoover's mistake and fail to see to it that the banks remained viable. So economy worries me. I'm of course concerned about world peace and the terrorists. I've got environmental concerns, global warming, pollution, danger to the Great Lakes from invasive species and pollution. These are all concerns, but they're concerns that every American shares. We have some differences to what ought to be done, but there's no difference of view, but it's something that's got to be done.
Our guest for the last 40 minutes has been John Dingell, the Dean of the House of Representatives and the Congressman since 1955 from the 15th District of Michigan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well, the House is coming into session in a pro forma session, and which means they're not going to do much business. But what's the purpose of a pro forma session?
Well, the rules of the House require that the House cannot, without the consent of the Senate and the President, be out of session for more than so long. But a pro forma session, remember, everybody looks and says, well, nothing's happening on the House floor. But if you look, you'll find one of the things that's happening while the House is having pro forma sessions is committees, and committee staffs are engaged in investigations or in executive sessions to write legislation, things of that kind. So things are happening over there.
And we're going to go to that now, but we will be back with the Journal after this is over.